Hi there, it's Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder here with one of my famous rant videos, and today I'm going to take a pop shot at Wizard of the Coast design, and can they please chill out with the amount of aggro cards they keep pushing out every standard set. And now with Bloomborough, we have some of the strongest aggro cards ever printed, and it is made for, in my opinion, a pretty miserable standard. Now, let's backtrack a bit. I've been around the block for quite some time. I started playing competitive Magic clear back in Innistrad, and there were aggro decks back then. They kept a lot of the cheese decks in check. I think the aggro has its place. If you go and look at the usual archetypes of Magic, how they've balanced it, there's aggro, mid-range, control, and combo. It's always going to be a mainstay. It has its purpose, but it also needs to be balanced, and it doesn't need to be over the top with some of these cards I think that they printed. I think have just been too good for the standard format. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So the problem we're having with standard right now, as you can see according to Goldfish, is Gruul Prowess is 17.7% of the meta. If you lump in Mono Red Prowess, they're basically the same thing. You're up to 20%. And if you even lump in some of these mouse decks, this one here is 2.6, and there's even like a Rakdos version of it that tries to utilize some of the like the new Phyrexia card that also can sacrifice and do damage. We're up to almost 30, 35, I'd even say 40% of decks right now are around this sort of red prowess archetype. And I haven't seen aggro this strong in a long time. Yes, we've seen some strong aggro formats. Amonkhet was one that comes to mind. And we've even had a very strong aggro deck. Embercleave, that was another one. I remember the days of Embercleave. But right now it seems that we haven't seen an aggro format nearly as defined as what's going on right now. And where you can see this is actually in the challenge. So what really comes to mind when you look at this challenge deck with these lists here? We have Dimir midrange that took it down. We have Orzhov midrange that got second place. We have Dimir midrange that got third place. And we have Rakdos Lizards that got fourth place. And I think that we have a common theme here with all of these decks, and that is cut down. That is the removal package from what Black has to offer. And it's just, we are such a cut down defined meta right now. And I would love to see the standard open up more. And I don't know if it is time for a ban, because as you can see right now, it wasn't even the most played deck in this challenge, and it wasn't it might have been the most played deck, but it actually didn't have the best finish. But what I'm trying to make a point here is that, and now since I've been trying to brew decks too, is you have to dedicate so many slots to deal with prowess, because Gruul Prowess right now, aggro, the standard deck, is as good as Red was when I started playing Modern. If you go back to that Boros Modern deck, they used to play cards like Boros Charm, Monastery Swiftspear. In fact, Monastery Swiftspear didn't even exist when the Modern format first came out. You're running things like Goblin Guides. And I would argue and say that this deck right now in Standard is as powerful as a Modern Burn deck, which is absolute insanity at this point with how strong it is. So let's just take a look at the Gruul Prowess deck and what I'm talking about. And the most problematic card, I actually think, is Monstrous Rage. Monstrous Rage is the card that I think makes it miserable for decks trying to compete against the aggro decks, because typically speaking, mid-range would beat aggro. That's how it would work in the kind of hierarchy of things. If you go back to the archetypes of aggro, mid-range, control, combo, control is typically good against mid-range and combo. It can suffer against aggro. Combo usually loses to control, and aggro can a lot of times go underneath it. And mid-range was the deck that kept aggro in check. And usually it's because you can stabilize and then aggro can't push through. Usually it either would have bigger creatures or life gain or something to stabilize, good removal spells. And Monstrous Rage, I think, really has made it so that Simic, Selesnya, Gruul, even so anything that doesn't have black in it are so unplayable because you cannot block against these decks. They just run you over with how big their creatures can get in one turn. One of the last games I played, I was actually on Rakdos Lizards and I was puking out my board, and my opponent wasn't doing anything and just ended up throwing out an Emberheart Challenger, and then on turn 4 unloaded their entire hand on their Emberheart Challenger and still pushed through. It was like 28 damage. And I mean, opponent didn't even care to interact with me. And that's kind of the problem I have with how some of these prowess decks are being run, is they are very, very non-interactive. And so this one too, right here, looks like it's just actually splashing for a snakeskin veil to give it some sort of protection against those cut down based decks. And so I would like to single out the monster strays particularly, is because this is the card, in my opinion, that makes it so those decks that usually worked on life gain or going over the top or stabilizing, they can't do that. You have to play black now. You have to play black in the format to deal with this boogeyman of Gruul prowess. And I think that's actually bad for the overall health of the metagame, because it's well, I don't know. It could lead to this point where, you know, we can see the domain decks start to come in to eat up on these what I would consider kind of tempo or mid-range based black decks that have started to gain a lot of favor, because one of the worst matchups for like the Dimir deck and the Golgari deck is something like Domain or Control, because they have had to utilize so many cards, and that's what I'm trying to focus on here. Since you have to have anywhere from between 12 and 16 slots to for removal, just to make sure you don't get run over by this deck, then a deck that doesn't care about low to the ground removal, like some of these Control decks, come in and they can just prey on those. And so it is kind of rock paper format right now in Standard, but it's starting to get pretty, I don't know, kind of get old is the best way to describe it. So again, let's go ahead and look at these decks here and see what I'm talking about, just the sheer amount of cards that are dedicated. So we have in this one, we have 4 go for the throats, 1 anoint with affliction, 3 steps ahead isn't really, that's more of a flex card. You can counter a spell, but that's typically not what's in here. Phantom Interference, same thing. You can create the 2/2. This given a little bit of play versus like the domain decks. That's why a lot of people are going into Dimir. This is the deck that has just really had a revival within the past couple weeks, because it does have play versus the control decks and the control decks like Domain and blue-white, and can still do really well against the aggro-based decks. And then they have cutdowns in here. And if you go over to the sideboard, you bring in like cutdowns, Lilianas, all of these things are also Harvester of Misery. All of these things have to be brought in versus the Gruul deck. So this one isn't the best example. Some of the examples I've seen decks have to run anywhere between like 12 to 14 main removal spells just to deal with the aggro threats. So let's go ahead and look at this. Maybe this Orzhov mid-range deck was the one I was looking at that was running just an insane amount of cards. So we have like Virtue of Persistence. We have Cut Down. Go for those. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 basically removal spells to try to interact early on with that prowess-based strategy. So, that's kind of my point. That's where I kind of stand with Standard, that you haven't seen a lot of brews from me, because I'm trying to fill out the format of what we can actually get away with. There are a lot of really, really fun cards. But as I said, if you look at I was noticing some of these, there was a Gruul prowess deck in the challenge that did quite good. There was even running just 2 slick shot show-offs. That's how strong these cards have become. That Slickshot Show-Off, which was one of the craziest cards printed for aggro out of Thunder Junction, is already now getting outclassed by the new cards out of Bloomborough. Everhart Challenger, just nuts. Does everything you want it does. It has like card draw, plus prowess, plus haste. Is Monastery Swifter even the best card? This is arguably the best one-drop aggro card ever printed. Is it actually even better now than like the Heartfire Hero or some of these other cards in this list? And we even have this Manifold Mouse, and this is just a miserable deck now to deal with. So again, just felt like I was in a bit of a ranty mood here. I want to know your thoughts about where we're at in Standard. This is a format that does interact a little bit, but I find Gruul prowess just to be incredibly boring to play and play against, because you're just basically slapping down cards. We've seen this strategy again and again throughout the cycle of Standard. You can even go back to Theros. There was a heroic deck that could kill quite quickly with pumping up. Was the Satyr at the time. It just got ++1 counters. There's a lot of white decks back in the day. It kind of felt like how this red deck is doing, and it's even so interesting to me that Lightning Strike is not seeing play in these decks because it's considered too weak. Lightning Strike used to be the staple for standard. It was the standard aggro card, 3 damage, just slightly worse than Lightning Bolt, just costs 1 more, and it just doesn't have a place in these type of decks because people have just figured out that it's just too slow to interact with the mirror and just doesn't push through enough damage, so they've opted to go for things like Shock for that slot instead. So I'd be interested in everyone's comment if am I way too far off with my rantiness for aggro, or has aggro gotten a little bit out of hand? It's funny how I was complaining about kind of the control cards in the last standard, but now aggro has just been pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed with these sets. I don't know where they can go with it, but in my opinion, if there were, I am thinking it is time if we start approaching 35-40%, if people don't give up on Grow Process. The problem is if the control decks or any of the decks that typically can prey on like the Golgari mid-range. The Golgari mid-range is a pretty staple of the format right now because it's got some cheese in it right now with the Innkeeper combo. But if those ever go away, then Prowess will just come back up and fill that void. And it just seems like no matter what, this is going to be a format that is balanced around Monstrous Rage and the cards that can actually work really strongly with Monstrous Rage. Anyway, if I were to ban one card, it would definitely be Monstrous Rage. I just think this particular card just does too much for 1 mana by pumping out 3 damage, which becomes 4 damage with the Prowess cards, and leaving back that 1/1. And the trample is massive too. Trample on this card just really pushed that sucker over the top. And I think that this card is probably too good. There are a lot of alternatives people can play. They can go higher up on Demonic Ruckus, which is a little bit slower. There are some other pump spells that are very reasonable right now in Standard that just don't have the kind of oomph that Monstrous Rage. And to kind of back up my point, it is seeing play all the way in the Modern decks the Grow Prowess is seeing play in Modern, and same thing in Pioneer. I believe it's 4 ofs in a lot of these decks too. So, nope, they're still using Mutagenic Growth in this one, but as you saw, it was seeing play. People have put Monstrous Growth in Modern before. If we come over here to, into Grow Aggro and Pioneer, it's a 4 of there as well. So, I don't know. I think Monstrous Rage and some of these cards are a little bit too good for Standard. I would like to see some breathing room. I'd like to see being able to play 3 drops. If you look at like all of the cards, you can kind of notice a theme that there isn't a lot of room for 3 and 4 drops that don't get immediate value or have some sort of effect of interacting. And there are a lot of neat cards that were printed in the past few sets that would be super fun and interesting to play. And that's kind of the problem with these Grow Prowess decks too, is they require so much removal. If you try to play any sort of creature-based deck that has some sort of interesting synergies, they just get eaten up by the plethora of removal spells that exist right now in Standard too. So that's my kind of analysis right now of Standard. I'm still having fun with it. Been playing some Arena. It's better than a lot of the formats in the past. As I mentioned, like these Golgari decks, if you get some of these mirrors and stuff, there's a lot of decision making, a lot more magic is being played than the cheese that has plagued us in the past with. I still even going back to like Eldraine, Throne of Eldraine. Those were miserable days in Standard, so this is a breath of fresh air. But unfortunately, I do think that aggro has gone to the point where it needs to be nipped in the bud a little bit. And especially, let's just hope out of Dustmore, and I haven't even looked at the spoilers, hopefully there's nothing that even pushes even more over the top with these aggro-based decks. Anyway, this has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.